Alright guys, welcome to our video on the sidebar. So that's what we're working on right now. The sidebar is down here at the bottom of our page. Okay, it encompasses these three images and this H2 tag here. Obviously right now it looks nothing like a sidebar, it's just all horizontal there. So we got a little bit of work to do. The div I'm working on is right here. I've given it an ID of sidebar. So let's get to it. Here's my ID all set up and ready to go for me. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a width, and I happen to know that the space left over and the space that this needs to be width-wise is 250 pixels. Alright, and next I'm going to give it a background color. And I'm going to use a color that we've been using before, just to keep my color scheme consistent here. So I'm going to refresh that, and there you go. So now it's 250 pixels wide, and it has that gray background color we just called out. And the images are stacked on top of each other. They're no longer side by side. Remember, images are inline elements. That's why they were side by side before. So there's not enough room for them, so now they're stacking on top of each other. And that's why that happened there, in case you were wondering. Okay. So next, I have to move that sidebar into place. Okay, so right now it's down at the bottom of the screen there. It's not where we need it to be. So I'm going to float that to the right. Okay, if you remember what float does is it pulls it out of the normal flow of things. You can either float left or you can float right. In this case I'm floating to the right, and it's going to go as far as it can until it hits an element that is no longer floated. So it can't sit next to that box above it because that's not a floated element right now. But it's the right size, and all I need to do is now move up to where it needs to fit, which is up here. Okay, this div here, this big main content div, is not floated right now. That's why it's not moving up any higher. It's hit kind of like a dead end. You can't go up past this at the moment. Okay, even though there's room for it. So let's go back to the code here. So I actually need to go back to that main content div that we worked on in the last video, and I need to float that out of the way. I need to float this to the left. Okay, I need to get them to sit side by side because floated elements will sit side by side as long as there's space for them to do so. As soon as they run out of space, then it moves down to the next line. But this is 250 pixels wide. I have 250 pixels of space right here, so this should work just fine. Alright, so I'm going to refresh the page, and there you go, it's bumped up. Alright, so it's exactly where we need it to be, right? It's bumped up to the navigation. The navigation bar is kind of like the dead end for both of these now, and they'll fit nicely side by side. They're exactly 800 pixels combined in width, so that's why it fits perfectly. And it looks pretty good, except I need to fix a couple of things here, right? The images aren't exactly centered. They're kind of far off to the left. There's a lot of space here on the right. And my H2 tag isn't centered. Okay, so still got some work to do. Now, I could give this sidebar some padding, like I did before, in which case I would have to fix the width, right? I need to subtract from the width, and it would be 220 pixels instead of 250 pixels. But that wouldn't work, right? So, by the way, if I make this bigger, it wouldn't fit. So if you get something like this, that's why. Remember to subtract, okay, from your total width. The reason I don't want to do this, though, is because these three images, I don't want to give each of these three images their own individual margins. I'm going to show you a different method for doing this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap these images so I can control them all at the same time. Okay, and images in general shouldn't just be elements that sit on their own. Proper HTML code will tell you that an image should sit either inside of a paragraph or inside of a div or inside of some other element. They shouldn't just sit there by themselves. Right now they're all sitting there by themselves, so let's wrap all three of them with a div because I want to be able to control all three of them. Okay, this is actually a more elegant way of solving this issue of centering these images into that sidebar. And they don't have to be just images, they could have been text that I could be centering, although I'll show you a different way to center text. So I'm going to give this ID this div an ID of centered images, right, because that's what I'm trying to do. Just name it something that makes sense. And I'm going to call it out in my CSS. So centered images. And that div now, I need to center within the sidebar. Okay? And in order to do that, I need to do two things to it. First is I need to give it a margin. And I'm going to give top and bottom 0 for now. And left and right I'm going to set to auto. And if you remember, we've used auto once before. Okay? So, let me let the video catch up here. We used auto on our container div, right? And what auto does when you use it on the left and right is it centers it inside of its parent. In this case, the container doesn't have a parent, it's the body itself. So the entire website's always going to stay centered in my web browser. Okay, if you guys remember that, you can go back and check out that video on the auto value. I need to center these images just inside of its parent, which is the sidebar. So I don't need to worry about, you know, how many pixels wide I need to do padding or margins or anything like that. This is kind of a more elegant solution, so this needs to be perfectly centered. And the one thing that you need to do, though, is if you're going to use the auto, is you need to give this a width that is smaller than the parent. If not, you're not going to see the auto work, because it's always going to be 100% the width of the parent, so it's automatically centered, right? So let's give this 180 pixels, because I know my images are 180 pixels wide. Okay, I remember that when I saved them in Photoshop. And there you go, they are centered. Okay, so that auto function automatically centers it inside of the parent. You don't need to worry about how many pixels you need to add to margins or padding or anything like that. It's kind of like an elegant way of solving that issue there. Okay, if you happen to need it to be centered. The last thing I need to fix is this H2 tag. This also needs to be centered. Okay, now I could have just wrapped it inside that div and everything would have been centered, but I still want to need to take one more step. So again, this is going to be fixed a different way, and I'm going to show you how to center text inside of an element, because we haven't done that yet either. Okay, so here's the H2, and similar to the last video, I could just call out H2 and apply my property and value to this, but it would apply to every single H2 on the page, and we don't want it to do that, because I actually do have a different H2 on here. I have one here, right? And I have one other one on top of, in between my paragraphs, where it says team history. So what I'm going to do to show you the difference here is I'm going to say text align, and you have a few different values you can use here. You can use left, center, or right, or justify. So similar to using like Microsoft Word, all the different types of ways of aligning your text. That's what this would be used for. Okay. So my H2, I'm going to text align center. The video catch up here. So it's going to center inside of whatever parent it's in. Okay. And there you go. But notice now that it's centered here, exactly where we need it to, but this one has also moved because it's an H2. Right? Just because I've used H2 once before in my CSS, and we've used it in the last video up above here, where we gave it a color and a margin, doesn't mean that if I call out it again that it's going to ignore it. It's going to take on those properties, right? So I need to change this to be a specific H2, and that's where class comes in handy again. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my HTML, and I need to change this H2 here to have a class, and we'll name it H2 centered. Alright, so now I need to call that out. So again, just like the last video, I just need to add a dot to call out a class, and call out the name that I named it, which is H2 centered. Okay, and now if I go and refresh the page, there you go. This guy moved back because it doesn't have that class. It's just the regular H2. It doesn't have a class attached to it. This guy still has that class attached to it, so it works just fine. Okay, the last thing is I need to add some margin on top here, because I'm liking the space there. It's a little too close to the top. So I'm going to add a margin on top. Let's try 10 pixels. And that looks pretty good, except I think we gave this 15 pixels, and I want it to be the same for both, for the sake of consistency. Be consistent with your layout styles here. There we go. Now those line up, and those are perfect. And there's our web page. It's looking pretty good. Alright. And let's go take a look at the image real quick of our original that we drew up in Photoshop when we first came up with this concept. And it looks pretty dead on. Okay. Those are my three pictures. My paragraphs look good. My links look good. My header looks good. The only thing missing from the layout that I drew in Photoshop was a footer. And I know some of you guys might need footers, want footers in your layouts. So I am going to add a video adding footers to this layout next week. And you guys will run into some issues if you have footers in your layouts now, where you're going to notice that after you float things left and right, that the footers are going to move up. And I'll show you how to fix that in case you run into that issue. If you haven't, don't worry about it. I'll show you how to fix that in case you do come across it. And that's it for now. Next week will be some more just short videos on little snags you might run into throughout your layouts. And I'll see you guys in the next video.